Hi, I'm Tom Stanley, and welcome to the Stanley Report, a monthly newsletter here in Waltham Cable Access Corporation. I'm here today with State Auditor Suzanne Bump, and we're in her office at the State House. Auditor Bump graduated from Boston College, Suffolk University Law School. She has 8 years experience in the Massachusetts legislature and over 30 years experience with administration in both public and private sectors, including a long stint as Secretary of Labor under Governor Patrick.
That's right.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's nice to be with you, Representative.
Thank you. I think a lot of people, one of the reasons why I have an electronic newsletter and also do this show is because a lot of times people don't have a full concept of what we do as elected officials, and I think it's a good opportunity to let them know how their tax dollars are being spent and how they're being spent wisely. So maybe if we can start out with, if you could tell us the general purpose and role of the State Auditor's Office, and then also what your role as the State Auditor is.
Certainly. Well, thanks for this opportunity, because you're right. I know from my own experience running for this position in 2010 that the concept of a state auditor is a little fuzzy for folks. As the state auditor, I'm one of 6 constitutional officers in the state, along with the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and treasurer. I serve as a part of the system of checks and balances in our state government, and my role is to follow the money that's being spent by state agencies and make sure that they are following the rules when they spend it, that they can account for what's been spent. So we ask, how much did you spend? What did you get for it? We want to focus as well on really what the benefits have been of a service that's been provided, and to ask the question additionally, how can we spend money better in state government?
Right. The State Auditor's Office, as we've alluded to, is an elected position, and I think in some other states perhaps it's not, but could you tell us why you think it's an elected position as opposed to an appointed one?
Well, just over behind your shoulder, beyond camera range, actually, is the portrait of the first state auditor for Massachusetts. This did not become a constitutional office until 1849. And at that time, it was not an elected position. It was a position, as I suggested earlier, that's part of the system of checks and balances. And so, although the auditor's office is within the executive branch of government, the original appointment was made jointly by the Senate and the House of Representatives, because the legislature saw it as a check on the appropriate spending of money by the executive branch. Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure when it was that we went from this legislative appointment of the auditor to the election of the auditor. A number of states have gone in that direction. Probably, though, I know that it's less than a half, about a third, I think, of states elect. The rest still have the legislative appointment. But again, with the elected office, it's about maintaining the independence of the position from the rest of the executive, which we are auditing. Right.
And what were some of your considerations when you decided to run for this position?
Well, you mentioned that I'd been in government service before, years ago in the State House, much more recently as Secretary of Labor. When I came back into government as Secretary of Labor, obviously with a very different set of responsibilities than when I was a legislator, I really was focused on how effectively money was being spent within my agencies. As Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, I oversaw the unemployment system and the workers' compensation system, a labor dispute resolution for the public sector, as well as the whole system of workforce training, that is skills development. And we were expending hundreds of millions of dollars, and my goal was to focus on what we were getting for it, and consolidated agencies to try to make them more efficient, focused on using better data so that we could do better strategic planning, so that we could better manage agencies and measure their performance. And so all those ideas around accountability really kind of bubbled to the surface in me, and I started to think of the auditor's office in a new way, and as a means of providing that kind of objective analysis of what's going on in state government, and then asking and hopefully helping you in the legislature to answer the question, how can we do it better?
Now, I think your office does hundreds, correct me if I'm wrong, but hundreds of audits in any given year. And generally speaking, what's reported, what type of information is reported within these audit reports?
Well, in the auditor's office here in Massachusetts, as distinct from other states, our focus is not just on the numbers, the way an accountant would be, but on performance, on asking the questions, do the state agencies that we're looking at have proper controls in place so that, first of all, money isn't being subject to waste, fraud, and abuse? And then are they following those rules? And many times our audits will find that people are not following their own procedures, and therefore they're wasting money, they're allowing people to expend it on things inappropriately. And we also, though, are starting to look at the bigger picture questions. So, for instance, we look at housing authorities and we look at education collaboratives, and we produce a series of audits and of all these separate entities, but they have common findings, money being misspent, agencies being mismanaged in a pattern of ways that caused us to step back and say, wow, well, how can this system be made better so that we don't have to go in repeatedly and suggest tweaks in little agencies? We can say, here's something that would, some fundamental change that will improve the governance of these agencies and their accountability to the public for how they spend their money.
I know your office was instrumental in coming up with some policy changes for the state for the education collaboratives in this past year. So your office not only looks at if agencies are spending the money the way they're supposed to be, but according to legislation, but also how legislation should change and what changes the legislature should make, or how agencies should implement what the intent is, things like that?
That's exactly right. You've got it exactly right. That's the value that I think the State Auditor's Office can have in informing policymakers like yourself and the executive branch on the way they're running agencies. The education collaboratives law that allowed the communities to form these collaboratives for special needs students, that went on the books a couple of decades ago. And the rules that govern it hadn't been revisited.
Right.
And so we found this pattern of problems, made recommendations to the legislature, and in pretty short order, you were able to increase the powers of school committees to get accountability from the collaboratives, increase the ability of the state to set standards for the operation of them. It's all to make sure that it's the special needs students and the taxpayers that are getting the benefit of these collaboratives, and not the staff of them or the board members.
And not only did your office issue the report, but then you participated in public hearings and testified.
Right.
And then you and your staff would also meet with various committee staff throughout the process and refine the legislation, just so people get an understanding of from start to finish. Another example might be, I know, is it last year or the year before? I think it was last year. I had requested from your office, as well as Chairman Ted Speliotis, for your office to review the homeless children's transportation cost for the city of Waltham separately, and then also Peabody.
Right.
And you did those individual reports or studies, and then took the information that you found and decided to do a statewide effort. And maybe you could, talk a little bit about that, because I know in Waltham, where I'm from, it's a big issue, and I know your work. It would have never gone through the House of Representatives without the work of your leadership and the staff here of documenting everything.
Well, you and your other legislative colleague, you heard what was going on in your local communities. You saw that numerous families who had become homeless, who had originally been in another community, were being temporarily placed in your communities. I think that Waltham, at the time of your request, though you only have a small percentage of the total population of the state, you had 12% of the homeless families in your community. And
1% originally from Waltham, but we were hosting 12% of the states.
Yeah, and so that, because of the way the costs had to be shared by the local communities for educating kids who weren't originally from your own community, and then transporting in cases where they wanted to stay in school in their home district, the cost of transporting those kids was really burdening your own school district, as it was up on the North Shore. And so we looked at the law regarding the obligation of the state to fund programs that it imposes on a community, and it was the law that was imposing this obligation on you, and determined under our legal analysis that that was really a program that the state should be paying for. But just to come to that decision didn't provide you with much help, because then then the question for the rest of you in the legislature was, well, so how much do we need to set aside to fund this? And so that study then that we did of all of the communities around the Commonwealth helped us determine that it was a total of $11.3 million across the state. For Waltham, it was over $140,000. There were 33 communities, in fact, that we found where spending amounted to more than $100,000. And so with that information, we were able to work with you, and you passed an appropriation in the House budget. The Senate passed a mechanism so that money can be spent. We now have to see that they work together and we get the appropriation and the mechanism. But it was, if you hadn't brought that question to us, though, we would not have thought to look at that issue.
But to the state, to your credit, you're also weighing in with the conference committee and just letting them know that you believe that it's the right thing for the state to do, to include the $11.3 million appropriation that the House put in, as opposed to nothing that the Senate decided to put in at the time.
Exactly. I have confidence. I don't have assurance, but I have confidence that that's going to be fixed, because that is a burden on communities. I mean, $140,000, that's a couple teachers.
Every year it adds up.
Yeah. So we want to make sure that communities aren't unduly burdened. Waltham was wonderful in welcoming these students into their population, into their schools. With the educational programs, the extracurricular programs, and the sports and all of that, and the support for the families. But there's a limit to what the taxpayers can bear.
So you and your office works with municipalities, local officials, local housing officials, state agencies, quasi-public agencies, nonprofits.
That's right.
And you also, could you talk a little bit about just how you work with the Attorney General and also interact with the federal government as well? Sure.
We also have a role in overseeing the money that's spent by contractors. in the state. So whether it's a human services program or it's an environmental cleanup program, we follow the money that's being spent there as well. We have, additionally, we have a unit of people that look at Medicaid spending and public assistance benefit spending, and we specifically there are looking for fraud, for abuse of those programs. We will go back then if we identify abuse then or fraud, then we'll work with the state agency to recover that money from the individuals, whether they are doctors or whether they are transitional assistance recipients. And then we can also work with the Attorney General's office on prosecutions of those cases, and sometimes to be a club even in a civil recovery situation. But we work with the Attorney General's office particularly on matters of fraud and prosecution. With regard to the federal government, we have responsibility for seeing not just that state funds are properly spent, but also that federal funds that are coming to the state are properly spent. And so when the legislature and Governor Patrick's administration was expecting the federal stimulus monies, they built up across state government, and that includes the auditor's office, a very vigorous program of standards for how that money was be spent, and then also audits to make sure that it is being spent properly. And so we have done literally dozens of audits of state agencies spending of that federal stimulus money, and we have found very few problems with the expenditure of those funds. So all of that
That's good
planning
news.
and emphasis on fighting fraud really has paid off well.
Very good. And now I understand there's also probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the more relatively new divisions of the Auditor's Office is the Bureau of Special Investigations. Right.
The Bureau of Special Investigations has been at different agencies over the course of years, but it resides here now in the Auditor's Office. We work with state agencies that administer public assistance programs, mass health, food stamps, transitional assistance, and the like. They will identify people that perhaps were initially eligible for benefits, and now they suspect that they're not being truthful about their income status and their continued eligibility. We work on the basis of a telephonic hotline so that members of the public can call us and tell us whether they think that someone is cheating one of these systems. We have investigators who have access to all kinds of databases of public information and of private information as well, and they make the case. They investigate these cases and then make the case to either recover that money or bring them for prosecution.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I think one of the cases was the EBT card. And a lot of people thought there was fraud going on, but much like what the problem I had with the homeless transportation costs, I didn't have the resources to document it, which you were able to do. In this case, I think your office did almost 1,000 investigations and came up with maybe over, if I remember right, over 400 instances of where there was fraud, and came up with some suggestions, I think, for the state legislature to make to reform that system.
We have a few things that are ongoing. Recently, some of our work around food stamps has been highlighted because this work, which we engaged in with the Attorney General's office and with the federal level and also with local police, involved people who were taking their food stamp benefit, going to certain stores where they were getting some cash back while the store was getting the full value of the benefit, and then the folks that were getting the cash were using it to buy things other than food. And so what we were seeing there was very organized activity that included shop owners as well as public assistance recipients. And so we worked with the police to have raids brought, to have people brought to court in order for them to be prosecuted. We've also seen some cases of folks who had substantial monthly incomes through their lottery winnings, and yet they were failing to notify the state of those winnings, and they were continuing on their Medicaid, mass health programs, and food stamps. We are currently undertaking an audit of the whole system of electronic benefit transfer cards to see whether there are sufficient proper controls around that program. So that we can, as you say, come back to you with some recommendations for how to tighten that up.
Which is so important for us, and sometimes in the heated debate, legislators are forced to make a decision on an issue that the public has a strong opinion on.
Right.
But it's important to have all this backup information so that we make good decisions and don't create other problems. And fraud in this area, of course, it's the few that do it, but it's important because the taxpayers get upset and their money, should be spent wisely, but also the people that legitimately need that assistance, they're being hurt, as you know, and as you've said, if the people that are abusing the system are allowed to do that.
Right. That's right. In the immediate instance, people are being deprived of money, and then over the long term, it erodes public confidence in the program. So our focus is on program integrity.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this yet today, but during this program, but how can citizens learn of results of all the audits that the Auditor's Office has done?
Well, we have a new policy of putting every audit that we do online at our website, making them publicly available, ones that have big findings as well as those that don't. So you can go to our website, which is mass.gov/auditor, and you can see not just our current work, but going back I know you can go back 5 years. I think you can go back 10 years to see all of the work that we have done. And in a revamp of our website, which will be effective at the beginning of July, you'll also be able to do a much more sophisticated and easy search of subject matter. So you won't have to necessarily know when the audit took place, and you can look for keywords rather than just the title. Because we want the public to understand what kind of work we're doing. Yeah. Likewise, you can learn about the reports. We do quarterly reports on the Bureau of Special Investigations on public assistance fraud. We have put up online as well our internal report called our Quality Assurance Report. We have to audit according to standards that are set by the federal government. That means that we have to self-assess how well we're doing on an annual basis. We've decided, although that's not required by the federal government to be made public, we're going to make that public so you can track all of the steps that we take to ensure the quality and objectivity of our own work. So all of that's available there too.
So you're holding the own office accountable.
Well, I have said that if we want people to pay attention to our audits, then we have to model the behavior we expect from others.
Right. We have just a couple of minutes left. Is the Education Collaborative audit the one you're most proud of, or was there something else that the office has done in the last year or two? Or?
Well, frankly, we've done a lot of good work, but I think that the Education Collaborative's reform is the best example of the way that I want to see the office used, not just to find fault and say, you really ought to fix that, but to say, wow, we have a bigger problem here than we originally thought. I have some ideas for how it could be made to work better, and then to bring them to you and so in partnership with you and the administration, actually make government work better.
Right.
So that is a great example.
And that's
of,
what people want. They
That's
want
right.
the elected officials to work together.
That's right.
So, all right, I think we've covered a lot today. I really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Representative.
Maybe we can do it again in the future and get an update.
I look forward to it.
Great.
We could talk about another success.
Yes. This has been another session of the Stanley Report. You can find me on Facebook, sign up for my electronic newsletter, and also now I'm on Twitter. So I'm catching up to the technological world and trying to hold fast, and the next thing that'll come out, we'll try to get on that as well. It's been great. Thank you very much. Have a good day.